Hello, and welcome to episode number 83 of the Become a Media Maven podcast. I am your host, Christina Nicholson, and I launched a business during a pandemic. And in this episode, I'm going to tell you all about it. It's something I've actually been waiting 3 years for somebody else to create, and I have been asking in Facebook groups for somebody else to create it, and I guess my impatience got the best of me. So I have been spending the last 5 months working with a team to create it. It is a software as a service product called Podcast Clout, and you can check it out at podcastclout.com. Why should you care? Well, if you want to grow your brand by being a guest on podcasts, then this is for you. In this episode, I'm going to tell you why you should want to do that and how it works.
Ever wonder how some people seem to get all the media coverage, but you don't? Go behind the scenes with a TV reporter, national on-air host, and news contributor who has interviewed celebrities, took you inside the Versace mansion, and even stood on a chair to interview basketball legend Alonzo Mourning. Get ready, because Become a Media Maven is the podcast where Christina Nicholson is sharing secrets from her years in front of the camera, in the editing booth, and now behind the podcast mic.
At the end of this episode, I am also going to share with you the exact pitch that I sent to Pat Flynn about 4 years ago when I was a guest on his podcast, Smart Passive Income, for the very first time. And this was when I learned the value of being a guest on a podcast. And since then, I have made it my number one marketing strategy, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. But quickly, I want to give you the link to that freebie, the exact pitch that I sent Pat Flynn, word for word. I'm not talking about a template here. You can get that at podcastclout.com/Pat. I'm also going to link to a lot of things in the show notes for this episode. But first, let me explain why I created podcastclout.com. So when I was a reporter, I would get so many emails on a daily basis. I'm talking hundreds of emails. And I always wondered how these publicists and eager business owners would find me to send me their terrible pitches to earn media coverage. And most of them were terrible, I assure you. And a lot of them spelled my name wrong. Some of them spelled the city I was in wrong. They would pitch me things that had nothing to do with what I did day to day as a reporter. But they found me, hundreds of them, every day. And I was like, how in the world is this happening? Then I worked at a PR agency for 6 months before going off on my own as a freelancer and then eventually accidentally building an agency. And that is when I learned about these databases. There are 3 main ones for people who work in public relations: Cision, Meltwater, and Muckrack. And basically, they make it possible for you to search for any journalist, reporter, editor, TV booker, you name it. You can search by location, topic, even by specific name to find the contact information of the person that you want to pitch. And these databases covered everything in the news industry. They were able to find the contact information for people at newspapers, magazines, all of the websites online, TV, but not podcasts. And as podcasting became more and more popular and it proved to generate the quickest ROI for guests, a database like this for podcasts specifically was in demand. Now, recently, Muckrack added podcasts to their database, but you have to invest in their entire system to get access to podcasts. And that's thousands of dollars a year. All of these outlets, Cision, Meltwater, Muckrack, to have access, to have a subscription, it costs thousands a year. And a frustration of many people in the PR industry is that if I call and I get a price, they'll tell me $5,000 a year. If somebody else calls and asks for the same thing, they'll tell them $8,000 a year. Like, their pricing is all over the place, and they will charge as much as they can to get as much as they can. And it really depends on who you're talking to get the lowest price. So I wanted to get away from all of that. I wanted to focus on something that was just for podcasts at a much lower price point. So my new business, Podcast Clout, is for podcasts only, and it will be for podcasts only forever. These other companies are big, like really big. They have teams of dozens, if not hundreds. One of them is even a public company. I do not want to be that big. I want to sell my measly $79 a month prescription to solopreneurs and marketing agencies who understand the value of podcasts. So how does it work? All right, so I'm going to link to a video because I think it would help to see the visual of how it worked since we are talking about software as a service. But in general, before this, it was damn near impossible to build a pitch list quickly for podcasts. You needed to go one by one, usually searching based on podcasts in a category. Like if you want to be on marketing podcasts, you will literally search all of the marketing podcasts one by one. And then sometimes you would check out if you liked this podcast, you might like this, and then add those to your list. Or you'll see subscribers who subscribe to this podcast also subscribe to this podcast, and then you can add those to your list. It's literally searching one by one and building a list, and that is pretty damn time consuming. And if you know me by now, if you've listened to podcast episodes in the past, you know I like to be very efficient and strategic with the way I spend my time. So Podcast Clout makes it easy to build an entire media list with information about the podcast, information about the podcast host, and contact information, as well as how to pitch to be a guest. A lot of times it's not always emailing, it's filling out a form on the website. I know that's how I accept guests. And it's funny, a lot of people will email me to be a guest, and I get a little discouraged. I'm like, why are you not filling out the form on my website? Like, you're not paying attention, people. Podcast Clout pays attention to that stuff for you. So my favorite part about Podcast Clout, and to be honest, it's the biggest pain in my ass, but it's good for you as a subscriber, is that the entire database is updated manually multiple times a week. So I don't want to use automated software. I don't want a robot to be updating this because they will pick up on podcasts that are no longer active. So if you start a podcast and then you stop it, Apple will not remove it from their database. It'll just sit there inactive, and you won't really know it's inactive unless you actually open it up and you see the last episode was released in 2011. And more than half of the podcasts listed are inactive. So right now, there's 1 million podcasts out there. We actually just hit the 1 million mark. There's 1 million podcasts out there. More than half of them are inactive. And an inactive podcast is described as something that has not released an episode in at least 3 months. So in 90 days, a new episode hasn't been released, it's inactive, but it's still in the database. So we check this on a regular basis because inactive podcasts could become active again. Some podcasts record in seasons, and some inactive podcasts, they're just gone. If they're not recording new episodes, it's silly to have them in the database. So it's manual. It's not automatic. And by updating this database manually, all 96 podcast categories in the database, you can be sure that the podcasts you find in Podcast Clout are currently recording, they're airing new episodes, and they are of top quality because we only include the top 200-ish podcasts in each category. Some categories have less than 200, and some will have more. So for example, as I'm working with my team to build this database, there are a few subcategories under the science category that have nowhere near 200 podcasts, like mathematics, for example, or physics or chemistry. They don't have a ton of podcasts. But then you have some like business marketing or business entrepreneurship. They have hundreds of podcasts. So we'll have more than 200 in the database if they're quality podcasts, if they're getting at least 100 downloads an episode. So it just depends on the popularity of the category and the number of podcasts in it. Again, I'm linking to a video in the show notes that take you behind the scenes of all of this to check it out. But bottom line on how this was created, you're not going to have podcasts on there that nobody listens to. You're only going to have quality podcasts on there that are current. And again, pain in my ass to keep it updated like that with tens of thousands of podcasts every week. However, I want this to definitely be a quality over quantity situation. So why do you need Podcast Clout? Well, if you're new here, let me tell you. If you're not new here, you already know, but let's reiterate because I do have some new statistics. You should be a guest on more podcasts, and I have a video for that too. It's in the show notes. But in a nutshell, I'm going to give you 5 reasons. 1, a podcast listener is more likely to invest, so you will see a quicker ROI. So obviously, I earn clients exposure in a variety of media, and everybody wants the big dogs, right? Like everybody wants to be on the Today Show. The Today Show is great media coverage in the sense that it gives you wonderful authority, wonderful credibility. When you tell people you're on the Today Show, they automatically know you're legitimate because you've been on the Today Show. And I've had a client on the Today Show, and that's how it worked for them, just because the way people perceive you is so much different. You don't get that on a podcast, depending on what podcast you're on. If you're on a bigger one with tens of thousands of downloads each episode, and it's well known, yes, you get that. But if you're on a podcast that nobody's heard of, it could still be popular. It's just nobody's heard of it. Remember, there's a million of them. They may not get that same wow factor as the Today Show. However, every podcast listener is more likely to invest in themselves personally and professionally. That is why people listen to podcasts. So while you're on the Today Show, people aren't going to run and buy from you because you're reaching such a broad audience. When you're on a podcast, people are way more likely to find you on social media, to connect with you on LinkedIn, to send you an email, to go to your website and opt into your freebie. It's just the way podcast listeners are. So you will see the quickest ROI from podcasts. Number 2, it's a great way to build long-term relationships with influencers. This is where thought leaders hang out. They're on podcasts and they're listening to podcast episodes and they're doing podcast interviews and they're hosting their own podcasts. So this is your in to share your expertise with those thought leaders and those influencers. Number 3, and this is a big one that keeps on getting bigger, podcasts never go away and they continue to grow. So when we think of things going away, I think of a social media feed. If I post something on Instagram at Christina All Day today, next week, you're going to have to scroll to find it. Podcasts never go away. They're always there. They're not only on your phone and your app, but they're also online. And they are continuing to grow. So here's a couple of statistics. More than half of all U.S. consumers above the age of 12 listen to podcasts. More than half. Nearly 3 out of every 4 podcast consumers in the United States say they're tuning into podcasts to learn new things, and they do so on a monthly basis. So when I say the quality of a podcast listener is more likely to buy, that's why. Because 3 out of 4 are tuning in to learn something, and they're doing it on a monthly basis. And here's a big one. This is according to eMarketer. Statistics show that 54% of podcast listeners are either somewhat or much more likely to consider buying from a brand after hearing it on a podcast. More than 54%, that's huge. You are definitely building credibility and authority on podcasts, and the people listening are paying attention. Number 4, it's one of the best ways to build an email list. This is my number one way of building email lists. I think the only other one that works really well for people is being a part of online summits, where you have to email your list and people have to opt in to attend the summit. Building an email list through podcasts is super easy because you just share a freebie. I already did it. I'm giving you the exact pitch, word for word, that I sent Pat Flynn to get on Smart Passive Income 4 years ago. You get that at podcastclout.com/Pat. And to get that freebie, you have to be on my email list. That's how I send it to you. I email it to you. Number 5, you can record a podcast from anywhere at any time. Now, I always liked this pre-quarantine, pre-coronavirus. I like the idea of working from anywhere, anytime. All you really need is Wi-Fi. If you have not been living the laptop lifestyle yet and working from home or working from wherever you can get stuff done, hopefully you will be soon, because for me, I'm much more productive at home, or right now as I record this in my closet, than I am in an office. So you can record a podcast episode from anywhere at any time. I've done it in my car before. I've done it in an office after a video shoot. And right now I am coming to you from my closet. This is my new podcast recording studio because I have lots of children at home. And this is where I can escape and shut doors and record without interruptions. Well, usually interruptions. If there's an interruption, you don't hear it because I usually edit it out, depending on the topic of the podcast. Here, you guys, literally, as I record this, I'm hearing an interruption. Landon, is that you? What do you need, honey? You want to show me your picture? Okay, I'm recording a podcast, so come show me real quick. All right. Okay. I'm actually not going to edit this out because it's very relevant to the point I was just making. So let's have a quick timeout while Landon shows me the picture that he's drawing. Okay, let's get back to it. So who is this for? Again, it's anybody who wants to build a brand by being a guest on podcasts. And this makes the pitching process so much easier, so much more effective, and it saves you a ridiculous amount of time in building your pitch list. That's really what this is. It's a huge time saver with relevant, factual information to help you get further faster. And if you're like me, you will invest in any tool to help you get further faster. Most subscribers will be PR or marketing agencies because this is what we do all day, every day. We pitch the media. But other bloggers, solopreneurs, and business owners who understand the value of being on a podcast can also opt in. It's just $79 a month, and it's even less if you invest in the annual subscription. You're paying less. I wanted to make sure it was super price friendly. I don't want to be like the other guys. I don't want to include everything under the sun. I don't want to veer away from building pitch lists and charge you thousands and thousands of dollars a year. So to celebrate me launching a business during a pandemic, because why not, right? It's not like I already have a business to run and lots of kids to take care of at home. Why not launch another business? But to be completely transparent, I started this in December, pre-pandemic. But to celebrate, again, I want to give you something that a lot of people ask me about, and that is how I got on Pat Flynn's podcast, Smart Passive Income. I've been on it 3 times now. The first time my business was nowhere near the size it is now. I mean, everybody thinks you have to, and this is good because it proves the perception you have of people who earn media exposure or who earn guest spots on popular podcasts. When I was on his podcast the first time, I was a little old freelancer making $1,000 a month some months. Some months it was $10,000. The month after that it was $2,000. Like, it was all over the place. I had no team. I was trying to sell my online course, the media mentoring program. At that time, it was called something else. So this just speaks to the fact that you don't need to have a big brand. You don't need to have a lot of money to earn massive media exposure. Since I was on Pat's podcast the first time, I was on again a couple of years later, and then I was just recently on a few weeks ago talking about working from home with kids. So I am sharing the exact pitch that got me on there the very first time 4 years ago. Because honestly, the next few times I didn't really pitch him. And even if I did, it would have been different and not relevant to you because I was already on once. So I'm sharing the exact pitch that I sent the first time. Again, to get it, head to podcastclout.com/Pat. If you have any questions for me about creating Podcast Clout, how it works, how to see a demo, all of the things, you can hit me up on social media. I am at Christina All Day. You can also send me an email. Check out the show notes. Before you send an email or you tweet at me or you Instagram me, which you should do that too, but you might have what you are looking for in the show notes because I am linking to a demo video. I am linking to why this is important. And I'm linking to just all of the things Podcast Clout that I have created since launching just a few weeks ago. Thank you so much for listening. If you have an idea, I hope you pull the trigger. This was something that, again, for 3 years, I was in my Facebook group with about 25,000 other people in PR asking, where is the Podcast Clout database? Where can we get this? Can somebody create it? And finally, I was just like, screw it. I guess I'm going to do it. Lots of people are asking for it. Lots of people want it. Lots of people need it. Nobody's making it. I guess I'll just make it. So that's what I did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Become a Media Maven. I will see you again soon. And if you haven't already, I would really appreciate you tapping that subscribe button, leaving me a positive rating or review. And if you know somebody who wants to build their brand, who wants to branch out, and maybe they have a side hustle that they want to earn more money with, please tell them about the Become a Media Maven podcast and let them know about Podcast Clout. Something else that I did not mention, but you may be interested in. If you do become a subscriber of Podcast Clout, I do have an affiliate program where you can get money by just referring people to Podcast Clout. So please check it out. That is at podcastclout.com. And there is so much in the show notes for you. Again, thank you so much for listening. Landon, do you want to tell everybody bye?
Bye. And I drew another picture.
And he drew another picture. He's here to tell me he drew another picture. So I guess I have to find a new office because the closet isn't working too well.